funny, isn't it? A man can live his whole life beneath his means, count every coin, avoid every luxury, and still lie awake at night, wondering why wealth never came. You work hard. You save more than most. You say no when others say yes to new clothes, new cars, new pleasures. You do everything they said was wise. And yet, there's still more month than money. Still a weight in your chest when bills come due. They told you that if you were frugal, you'd be free. That if you learned to tighten the belt, you'd someday taste comfort. But here you are, still watching prices, still calculating, still stuck. And that's the bitter truth, isn't it? Frugality on its own doesn't make you rich. It makes you careful. Yes, it makes you cautious. It makes you survive. But it doesn't make you wealthy. You can spend your whole life trying to protect what little you have and never once learn how to grow it. Because you were trained to reduce, not to expand. You were praised for playing defense, not taught to play offense. You were taught that spending less was the answer, but no one showed you how to earn more. No one handed you the skill of turning value into income, of turning ideas into opportunity, of turning your voice, your hands, your vision into something the world would pay for. So instead, you hoarded pennies. You mastered the art of restraint, but no one taught you the art of creation. And I know why. It's not your fault. Most people around you never knew either. They were surviving. Just like you, and survival can't teach you how to thrive. See, poverty has many faces, not just the one on the street, not just the empty fridge. There's another kind, more subtle. It wears a mask of discipline. It looks responsible, even admirable, but deep down, it's still fear. You fear loss, so you hold tight. You fear risk, so you shrink your life. You fear the unknown, so you live inside small numbers. You call it prudence, but sometimes it's just a cage made of math, a prison of safe calculations, where every decision is measured in what you might lose, not what you could build. And it's not that frugality is wrong. No, it's a wisdom, in part. But it's not the whole story. It's only the beginning. It's the gate that keeps your house from flooding. But it's not the sun that grows your garden. You need more than just frugality. You need something deeper, something bigger. You need to learn how money moves, how value multiplies, how the world rewards those who step forward, not just those who step back. You need to ask a different question, not just how do I save more, but how do I become more valuable? And maybe that question scares you, because it means stepping into a place you don't yet understand. It means trading control for curiosity, certainty for potential, and for someone who spent a lifetime managing lack. The idea of growth can feel like a risk you can't afford. But listen to me now, you can't afford not to grow. You can't afford to wait for safety to lead you into abundance. Because safety, as you've known it, is small. It's a habit dressed in responsibility, but it has nothing to do with wealth. Wealth, real wealth, begins the moment you stop asking, how little can I live on? And start asking, what value can I bring that the world will reward? That shift, that one shift, changes everything. It moves you from defense to creation, from fear to contribution, from poverty of protection to prosperity of purpose. But it takes courage, the kind you haven't needed in years, the kind that doesn't show up in coupon books or grocery budgets, the kind that asks you to bet on yourself. So sit with that a moment. Let it breathe with you. You've been fighting to keep your bucket from leaking, but maybe it's time to build a well instead, and no one taught you how, but that's all right. That's why we're here, not to judge what you've done, but to ask you, are you ready to stop guarding the crumbs and start baking the bread? You didn't choose frugality because you love being small. You chose it because it gave you something else, something deeper than money, something you didn't even know you were looking for: control. That's what it gave you in a world that felt unpredictable, unstable, out of reach. Frugality gave you a grip on something. You couldn't control the economy. You couldn't control your boss, your childhood, your neighborhood. You couldn't control the price of gas or the rent, or the broken down car. But you could control yourself. You could say no to the new shoes. You could eat the same meal 3 nights in a row. You could patch the roof yourself and stretch the shampoo and make it all just barely last. And in that control, you felt power, or at least you felt less powerless. Because that's the truth no one says out loud. Most frugality doesn't begin with logic. It begins with fear, and fear wears the mask of wisdom. Call it smart, you call it responsible, but deep down, it's about avoiding pain, avoiding risk, avoiding the shame of being caught off guard again. And I understand that, I really do, when you've been broke, truly broke, when you've looked in the fridge and seen nothing but light, when you've opened the mailbox and found more threats than letters, when you've sat in silence, not answering the phone because you know who's calling. Then frugality feels like safety. It feels like armor, like a thin layer of protection between you and the chaos of the world. But here's the trouble. You start to wear that armor even after the battle has passed. You keep living like the wolf is at the door, even when the street outside is quiet. You keep shrinking your life, even when you have space to expand. Because somewhere along the way, smallness became familiar, and familiar became safe, and safety became your goal. But let me ask you something. What is safety without joy? What is control if it costs you your capacity to grow? You see, the greatest danger of frugality isn't the lack of spending, it's the lack of vision. You get so used to guarding the little that you forget to imagine the much. You forget that money was never meant to be worshipped or feared. It was meant to be used, to build, to bless, to move, to create. But frugality teaches you to hold on to, not move, to hesitate, to wait until the numbers feel perfect, and they never do. And so you stay still. You tell yourself, maybe next year when I've saved a little more. And another year passes, then another, and your life becomes a waiting room with no appointments, all because you thought safety was the same thing as wealth. It's not. Safety is a floor, wealth is a roof. You need both. But too many people spend their whole lives laying floor tiles, never realizing they were meant to build upward. And here's the hardest part to face. Sometimes the very thing that kept you afloat in the beginning becomes the thing that's holding you down in the end. Frugality saved you once, but it's not meant to lead you forever. Not if you want to grow, because growth demands discomfort. It demands movement. It demands trust, not just in the world, but in yourself. And that's where many people get stuck, not because they don't want more, but because they no longer trust that they could handle more. They've spent so long living inside limitation that freedom feels foreign, abundance feels reckless, opportunity feels like a scam. So they retreat to what they know, to the numbers they can measure, to the plans that feel small but safe, and they miss it. They miss the window, the moment when life invited them to rise, but they said, no. Thank you. I'll stay right here with what I understand. And no one blames them, not really, because the world has punished them before for reaching too far. But the world will also never reward them for never reaching at all. So maybe this is where the shift begins, not by abandoning frugality, but by seeing it for what it really is, a season. Not a strategy, a tool, not an identity. And when the time comes to grow, you must be willing to put down the shield and pick up the seed. Because you can't plant anything while your fists are clenched tight around what little you have. Let that settle for a while. Let it sit with you. This isn't about spending money you don't have. It's about opening your hands so that something new can be placed in them. There's a quiet rule that money follows, not one they teach in school, not one printed in books, but a rule that shows up again and again. If you pay close enough attention, money doesn't stay where it's held. It stays where it's moved. With purpose. Strange, isn't it? You'd think holding on to money tightly would protect it, but in time, it slips through closed fists just the same. Because money, like water, needs to flow, not leak, not spill, but flow. And that's where the frugal often get stuck, not in the saving, but in the stopping. They build dams where there should have been rivers. They store, but they don't circulate. They keep, but they don't use. And I don't mean waste. I don't mean blind spending. I mean strategic movement, thoughtful exchange, putting money into people, into ideas, into tools that grow, not just last. Because money, when moved with intention, tends to return. But money held in fear, it dries up, bit by bit, until one day you're left with savings that didn't save you, only stalled you. Now listen, I know what you might be thinking. If I move the money, I might lose it. And you're right, you might. But what no one ever says is, if you never move it, you lose it anyway. You lose it to time, to inflation, to missed chances, to a life half lived out of caution. See, there's a reason the wealthy talk about money working for them. Because they understand the principle of movement. They don't just stash cash. They assign it. They assign it. They invest it into things that produce more value. That's what movement is. It's money carrying a job, doing something while you sleep, building something while you rest, making new doors where there were none before. But that mindset doesn't come easy when you've lived in survival, when every dollar you've ever held felt like it could be your last. You don't think about movement. You think about preservation. You think about how to make it last until Friday, how to stretch it when the hours don't match the bills. And over time, that mindset sinks into your bones, not just as habit, but as identity, as the lens through which you see every decision. So even when a new opportunity comes, a course, a tool, a seed, you hesitate, not because it's a bad investment, but because your muscle memory still believes money is something to guard, not something to grow. You think, if I spend this, I'll have less. But the wealthy think, if I plant this, what might it return? That's the difference. You're thinking subtraction. They're thinking multiplication. You're holding, they're moving. And that difference in mindset creates a different future, not overnight, but eventually, always, because money isn't magic. It's a mirror. It reflects how you think, how you see risk, how you see yourself. And if your thinking says, I can't afford to lose, then life will never give you the chance to win. Because the door to growth requires a step you don't fully control. It requires faith, not in luck, but in you, in your ability to learn, to adapt, to recover, to create. And that's the muscle you need to grow wealthy, not just the habit of saving, but the courage to move, the wisdom to plant, the clarity to know when it's time to stop protecting and start progressing. So ask yourself gently, when was the last time you moved money in a way that could grow you? Not just pay something off, not just fix a hole, but stretch your capacity, increase your skill, deepen your reach. And if you can't remember, that's all right. But maybe it's time to remember who you were before fear took the reins, before smallness became safety, before survival became your entire strategy, because deep down, you're not just a protector of resources, you're a builder of value, a maker of movement, a steward of seeds. And the world doesn't need more people hoarding crumbs. It needs people willing to bake the bread, to invest in something larger than their fear. That's where the shift begins, not in your wallet, but in your thinking, not in your savings account, but in your belief about what you're capable of creating. And it's not too late. Not for you, not if you're still listening. You were taught to manage, to make do, to stretch what little you had and make it reach just a bit further, and for a while, that made sense. You didn't have much, so you became resourceful, clever, disciplined. But here's the quiet danger. Sometimes the very thing that once empowered you becomes the thing that now imprisons you. Frugality can turn into a cage, not made of steel, but of invisible bars, wrapped in logic, wrapped in good sense, wrapped in stories you were told again and again. Don't take risks. Play. It's safe. Just be grateful for what you have. And maybe that made sense back then, when you were trying to survive, when you didn't have any margin for error, when one wrong step could cost you a meal, or a month, or a home. But now the danger has changed. Now the risk is staying exactly where you are. See, when frugality becomes your identity, it stops being a choice and starts being a wall. You stop imagining what's possible. You stop reaching. You stop trusting your own ability to stretch into something greater. You don't ask, how can I grow? You ask, how can I stay safe? And that question keeps you small. It turns life into a loop. Same habits, same thoughts, same fears dressed in different clothes. You live inside numbers, but not inside purpose. You optimize your bills, but never your gifts. You track every cent, but lose track of your own potential. And no one tells you that this kind of smallness is just as costly as overspending. Because while you're proud of how little you need, you never ask, is that all you were meant for? Were you put here just to survive? Just to protect the few coins in your pocket? Or were you meant to learn, to build, to create something that expands beyond your needs? The truth is, wealth isn't built on what you avoid, it's built on what you pursue, what you initiate, what you offer. But that requires vision, and vision doesn't live in a fear-based budget. It lives in your spirit, in your ability to see beyond where you are now, into a future that feels slightly out of reach. That kind of future can't be reached by saving alone. It has to be stepped into, with decisions that stretch you, with investments that reflect who you're becoming, not just who you've been. And that's what most people miss. They think being frugal means being wise, but wisdom isn't about fear. Wisdom is about alignment. Spending less isn't wisdom if it's keeping you from learning, from growing, from building something that could carry you further than savings ever could. And no, this isn't about abandoning discipline. This is about aiming it higher, pointing it toward a vision, not just protection. Because here's what you'll discover. When your actions come from vision instead of fear, you'll still be careful, but you'll also be bold. You'll still count the cost, but you'll also see the return. You'll stop saying, I can't afford that, and start asking, how can I create the means to make that possible? That shift changes everything. And maybe you've never asked yourself that kind of question before, because no one showed you how. They only showed you how to survive, how to cut back, how to get by. But you've done that already. You know how to survive. You've mastered it. Now it's time to learn something new. How to thrive. How to move from shrinking into yourself to stepping fully into what you could become. And it won't come all at once, but it begins with a simple realization. that the world doesn't reward your restraint. It rewards your value, your creativity, your problem solving, your courage. To bring something to life, and those things don't grow inside a cage, even if that cage is tidy and respectable and called being responsible. So take a breath and ask yourself, has your frugality turned into fear with a halo? Is it serving your future or just keeping your past alive? Because there's nothing noble about staying small when you were built to expand. Nothing wise about avoiding loss if it costs you your calling, and nothing secure about a life that never moves forward. You don't need to abandon everything you've learned, but you do need to ask, is it still serving you? Or have you outgrown it? There's a truth you may not have been told, or maybe you heard it once but didn't believe it, because it sounded too far from the world you knew. You don't get rich by protecting money. You get rich by producing value. That's the dividing line, the quiet difference between those who stay stuck and those who rise. It's not how carefully they save, it's how consistently they create. Not just things, not just products, but value, something the world is willing to trade for, willing to reward, willing to return again and again. See, money doesn't chase those who hide it. It chases those who multiply it. But that's not what most of us were raised to believe. We were taught to preserve, to protect, to stretch and scrimp and play it safe, because that's what our parents did and their parents before them. They didn't have margin, so they learned to make do, and they passed that down like a badge of honor, this ability to go without, to endure with less, and for a time that was noble. It built resilience, it forged strength, but there's a cost to that kind of inheritance. A quiet message passed down through generations, that safety comes from staying small, that dignity is found in needing nothing, that you are more responsible when you disappear into your limits. But here's what I need you to hear: there is no wealth in disappearing, no abundance in only avoiding pain. If you want to grow, if you want to rise, you must become someone who produces value, not just someone who avoids loss, because wealth is a reflection of your ability to solve problems, to meet needs, to show up with something the world wants, and that requires more than frugality. It requires creativity, curiosity, courage, and above all, belief. Belief that what you carry inside you is worth bringing to life. Belief that you have something worth offering, even if it doesn't look like the people you see on TV. Even if it doesn't fit in a neat little box. You might not be a business person. You might not be an investor, but that doesn't mean you can't create value. That doesn't mean you can't learn, because value isn't just found in big ideas or flashy projects. It's found in service, in skill, in showing up with intention. It's the woman who bakes bread so good her neighbors beg for it. It's the man who fixes old bikes and gives them new life. It's the artist who turns quiet grief into something beautiful and honest. It's the teacher, the mentor, the thinker, the maker. It's you, if you choose it. But the longer you stay in the mindset of protection, the longer you stay small, the harder it becomes to believe you have anything worth sharing. Because protection shrinks you, creation expands you. Protection says, I can't afford to lose. Creation says, I'm willing to risk becoming more. And don't let the world trick you into thinking this path is reckless. It's not. It's responsible in a deeper way. Because what's more responsible than learning to carry your own future? What's more secure than becoming someone who can create income at will? Not because the economy is kind, but because you've built the muscle of value. You want security? Don't just save, produce. Don't just avoid mistakes. Develop. Mastery, that's what lasts. Not the bank balance that never moves, but the ability that always can, and it's not too late. No matter how long you've been careful, no matter how long you've been small. This is the part they don't talk about, that wealth begins the moment you stop guarding your life and start building it, not because you're greedy, but because you're ready, because you're tired of asking, is this all there is? And finally ready to answer, no, there's more. And I can build it. So start small if you must, but start creating. Start learning what the world values and how you can bring it. Start becoming a producer, not just a protector, because frugality might preserve your life, but it's value that will expand. And you weren't born just to hold on, you were born to build. It's strange how something planted long ago, something said in passing, something absorbed without your permission, can shape your whole relationship with money for decades. You think you're just being smart, just being careful, just being responsible, but underneath the caution, there's a belief, and that belief is running the whole show. It might sound like, money is hard to come by, or rich people can't be trusted, or I don't need much, I'm not greedy, or maybe just people like me don't get ahead. And the problem with these beliefs isn't that they're loud. It's that they're quiet. So quiet you don't even hear them anymore. You just follow them like a path you didn't realize you were walking. You say no to things you secretly want. You pass up opportunities you don't feel worthy of. You avoid growth because it feels like betrayal, like leaving behind the people you came from. And all the while, you call it wisdom, you call it virtue. But deep down, it's just an old story, told too many times to question. Maybe your father struggled with money, so you learned not to expect much. Maybe your mother clipped coupons until her hands ached, so you learned that sacrifice was love. Maybe you grew up hearing whispers of envy, how the rich were selfish, shallow, disconnected. So you decided quietly that you would never become like them, even if that meant staying small, even if that meant turning away from the door marked abundance. Because in your heart, it didn't feel safe, it didn't feel right. And here's the catch. If your deepest belief says wealth is wrong, you will always find a way to push it away. Even when it knocks on your door, you'll self-sabotage. You'll delay, you'll undercharge, you'll overgive, you'll create just enough. And then stop yourself, and you won't know why. You'll think it's bad luck, or bad timing, or just not your season. But it's not the season, it's the seed. And it's been buried so deep in your thinking, you forgot it was even there. That's what frugality sometimes hides, not just discipline, but a quiet, lifelong discomfort with having more. Because to have more might feel selfish, or unsafe, or lonely. And if no one helps you unearth those old beliefs, you'll keep living inside them, year after year, calling it maturity when it's really just fear with a suit on. But here's the truth. You can't build wealth on a foundation of guilt. You can't expand if your heart thinks growth is betrayal. You can't receive what you secretly believe you don't deserve. So you have to go back, not to stay, but to see. You have to ask, what did I learn about money that no longer serves me? Whose voice still echoes when I think about wealth? Whose fears am I still carrying like they're my own? Because once you name them, once you drag them into the light, they start to lose their grip. They start to unravel, and you begin to see. Frugality didn't come from nowhere. It came from pain, from fear, from the need to survive in a world that felt unstable. But now you don't need to just survive. Now you're allowed to want more, to dream bigger, to build something not because you're afraid, but because you're free. And that shift changes everything, because money no longer becomes something you fear, or chase, or shrink for. It becomes something you receive. because you're finally ready to hold it without guilt, to grow it without shame, to become someone who doesn't just manage scarcity, but stewards abundance, not for greed, not for pride, but because you've done the inner work, and now you're ready for more. Not more stuff, more capacity, more contribution, more quiet confidence in who you've become. Let that sink in. You've been living under beliefs that were never yours to keep. Now it's time to choose your own. There's something I wish more people understood about money. It's not just numbers on a screen. It's not just budgets and spreadsheets. It's not even about frugality or discipline. At its core, money responds to identity. And your identity, who you believe you are, is the silent thermostat of your financial life. You may think you want more money, but if you see yourself as someone who only gets by, or someone who always has to hustle, or someone who isn't good with money, then even when you try to save, to earn, to invest, your identity will quietly pull you back to the level you're familiar with. Not because you're lazy, not because you're bad with money, but because deep down you're still loyal to a version of yourself that no longer fits who you're becoming. You see, the human mind craves consistency. We don't just want to succeed. We want to feel right about who we are. So when we start to grow, when we start to earn more, something strange happens. Instead of celebrating, we sabotage. We overspend. We procrastinate. We shrink. We delay. Why? Because abundance feels unfamiliar. And familiarity feels like safety, even if that familiar pattern is struggle. I've seen it too many times. A man gets a promotion, and suddenly he finds new ways to waste it. A woman saves $10,000, and just as quickly, something unexpected wipes it all away. They didn't plan to lose. They didn't mean to fall back. But their identity, their internal self-image, wasn't ready to hold more. That's the truth most financial advice misses. It's not just about how much you have. It's about how much you feel safe to hold. And frugality, when it becomes your entire identity, can trap you in the same small space for years. You don't stretch. You don't risk. You don't allow abundance. Because deep down, you still think you're the one who has to cut corners, the one who has to be careful, the one who doesn't deserve more. So let me ask you gently, who do you believe you are when it comes to money? Do you see yourself as a builder, a creator, a person who adds value to the world and is compensated in kind? Or do you still carry the image of someone who's barely surviving? Someone who needs to be frugal because they could never truly be rich? Because no amount of budgeting will free you if your self-image is still chained to lack. Now, here's the good news. Identity isn't fixed. It's not carved in stone. It's more like clay, shaped by habit, environment, and the stories you repeat. You can reshape it, not by faking it, not by pretending, but by aligning your actions with who you want to become. You start small. You say to yourself, I'm the kind of person who creates value. I'm someone who can be trusted with wealth. I'm no longer afraid of having more, because I know how to use it well. And then you live into that truth. Little by little, quietly, faithfully, you invest in yourself, not just to gain more, but to grow more. You stop playing small just to stay relatable. You stop dimming your light to keep others comfortable, because the version of you that's wealthy, generous, and at peace with abundance, that version already lives inside you. They're just waiting for permission to take the lead. But they can't lead until you let go of the identity that only knows how to save, cut, and sacrifice. There's a time for frugality. It's a good servant. A wise teacher, but it's a terrible identity. Because it teaches you how to survive, not how to expand that. And if you want to grow rich, not just in money, but in spirit, contribution, and freedom, you have to become someone new, not someone fake. Someone truer, someone who doesn't just manage scarcity, but multiplies abundance. Let this be your quiet breakthrough. You don't have to cling to the identity that built the first chapter of your life. You're allowed to outgrow it. You're allowed to evolve. You're allowed to become someone who receives with peace and gives with strength and holds wealth with clarity, not guilt. It starts when you stop asking, "What can I cut?" and start asking, "Who am I becoming?" Let me speak to something I've seen growing quietly in many good people, especially those who have struggled, sacrificed, and learned to live with little. It's the quiet pride of having less. At first glance, it seems harmless, even noble. You hear people say things like, "I don't need much. I live simply. I'm not like those greedy people chasing money." And they say it with a kind of gentle superiority, as if having little is a moral badge, as if wanting more is a weakness, as if abundance is something to be wary of, or even ashamed of. Now, don't misunderstand me. There is beauty in simplicity. There is wisdom in contentment. There is peace in knowing you're not owned by your possessions. But when simplicity becomes your identity, when you take pride in how little you have, you may begin to quietly reject the very abundance that could bless your life and others. It's a subtle trap, because it's not loud. It doesn't look like failure. It looks like virtue. You feel like a better person for not needing more. And slowly you begin to equate poverty with purity and wealth with corruption. But here's the danger in that. If you believe wanting more makes you less spiritual, you will always sabotage your own growth. You will pretend to be content when deep down you're tired of the strain. You will reject opportunities because they look too big for the image you've built. You will stay small because you've confused struggle with humility. And worst of all, you'll judge those who expand, who earn, who grow. You'll call them lucky, greedy, or lost, when in truth, they simply gave themselves permission to live beyond just enough. My friend, poverty is not purity, and wealth is not wickedness. What matters is how you hold what you have. Not whether it's little or much, but whether it flows through clean hands, through open hearts, through meaningful work and wise decisions. It's not immoral to desire more, if that more is tied to service, vision, and purpose. It's not greedy to expand, if your expansion allows others to breathe easier, grow deeper, live freer. But if you cling too tightly to the identity of the simple one, you may start to feel threatened by your own potential. You'll say things like, "I don't want to make too much. I'm fine where I am." Money changes people. But maybe what you really fear is that wealth will ask more of you, that it will stretch your self-image, that it will require you to live with new responsibility, new visibility, new power. Yes, money does change people, but so does lack. So does constant strain. So does hiding your brilliance so others feel more comfortable. Don't let pride in having little become your prison. Let frugality be a chapter, not your whole story. You were not born to spend your life only mastering how to cut back. You were born to create, to build, to multiply value, to give freely from a full cup, not just scrape by with an empty one. So if you've been wearing simplicity like a shield, if you've been afraid to want more because it doesn't feel pure, let that go now. You don't have to become Flashy. You don't have to chase riches mindlessly, but you are allowed to grow. You are allowed to receive. You are allowed to hold more with humility, purpose, and grace. That's what true wealth is. It's not a number. It's not an image. It's not a trophy. It's a quiet strength, rooted in the truth that you have enough. And you can create more. Let this be your quiet permission. You don't have to stay small just to stay good. You can be abundant and kind, wealthy and grounded, prosperous and peaceful, and the world won't be worse because of it. It will be better, because when good people grow wealthy, they change everything. Let's look now at one of the most hidden reasons people cling to frugality. Long after it's served its purpose, it's not about values, not about simplicity, not even about saving money. It's about control. You see, when life has tossed you around, when you've tasted instability, when you've been let down, laid off, or left behind, you start looking for something solid to hold on to. And for many, frugality becomes that anchor. It gives you a feeling of power. I can say no to the world. I don't need their system. I'll protect myself by keeping everything small, neat, and manageable. Frugality becomes a shield, not just from debt or excess, but from uncertainty, from risk, from the messages of expansion, from the fear that if you step too far out into the unknown, you might get hurt again. You start to think, if I just stay small enough, careful enough, modest enough, I'll be safe. And so you double down on cutting back. You chase the cheapest options. You sacrifice time, energy, and opportunity, all in the name of saving. But here's the paradox. My friend, trying to control everything is the surest way to stay poor. Because real wealth isn't tidy. It isn't perfectly predictable. It lives in movement, in flow, in calculated risk. Wealth requires you to let go of the tight grip, to stop micromanaging every penny, and start asking, where is value created? What seeds can I plant? What opportunities feel aligned, even if they feel uncomfortable? See, a person trapped in frugality, as control, has trained themselves to trust only in lack. They believe, I know what happens when I have nothing. I can survive that. But I don't know what happens when I have more, so I'll avoid it. It sounds strange, but many people feel safer in struggle than in success. Because struggle is familiar. Success feels foreign. And anything unfamiliar feels dangerous. That's how control sneaks in. It whispers, don't invest, you might lose it. Don't grow, it might not work. Don't trust, it could fall apart again. But listen closely. That voice isn't wisdom. It's fear, dressed in the clothing of prudence. True wisdom doesn't say, avoid all risk. It says, understand your risk, choose wisely, then take the step. Frugality can teach you discipline, but it cannot teach you expansion. That's another skill entirely, one rooted not in control, but in trust. Trust in your own capacity. Trust in your ability to recover from setbacks. Trust that you are not the same person who once struggled. To survive, you are stronger now, wiser now, more capable now. So let me ask you gently, has your carefulness become a cage? Are you still living like the person you used to be, instead of the person you're becoming? Are you clinging to frugality, not because you love simplicity, but because you fear uncertainty? If so, it's time to loosen your grip, not recklessly, not all at once, but gradually, intentionally, with eyes open and heart steady. You don't have to trade your values for abundance. You don't have to lose yourself to grow, But you do have to let go of the illusion that control is safety. Because true wealth, lasting wealth, doesn't live in control, that it lives in courage. In creativity, in your ability to step out of the known and build something better. And that can't happen if your whole life is built around minimizing risk. At some point, frugality must pass the torch to investment, to vision, to faith in your own growth. Otherwise, all you've built is a smaller version of the same fear. And fear, my friend, never leads to freedom. So after all this talk of frugality, mindset, and expansion, let me ask you one final question. What do you believe wealth really is? Is it a number in a bank account? A lifestyle with no restrictions? Is it the absence of financial stress? Or is it something deeper? See, the poorest people I've met weren't always low on money. They were low on vision, low on self-worth, low on freedom. And the richest people I've known, they weren't always flashy or free from fear. But they had something most don't. They trusted their ability to create value, to rebound from failure, to act despite fear. They knew that wealth isn't stored in the wallet, it's stored in the mind, the habits, the decisions made in quiet moments. Because here's a truth no one teaches. You don't become rich by just being good at saving money. You become rich by becoming a person who knows how to create value over and over again. Frugality may be the first teacher. It shows you how to live with less. It humbles you. It disciplines you. It makes you resourceful. But eventually, it must pass the baton. You must grow from the student of scarcity into the creator of value. Because if all you ever master is restraint, you will always be waiting. Waiting for a good deal. Waiting for a safer time. Waiting for permission. And wealth doesn't wait. It moves. It flows to those who dare to contribute. To those who offer something better than what already exists. Wealth follows energy. It follows problem solvers. It follows those who stop asking, how can I save more? And start asking, how can I contribute more? You see, my friend, money doesn't come from saving. It comes from serving. You can clip coupons. You can cook at home. You can buy secondhand. But if you never learn to identify needs and fill them, you will never create real wealth. That's the piece frugality can't give you, because frugality is about holding on. And wealth is about letting go of fear, of control, of limits. It's about stepping into the unknown and saying, yes, I might fall, but I also might fly. And what if you do? What if you stopped thinking like someone just trying to survive and started thinking like someone who was born to build? What if your true strength wasn't in how little you spend, but in how boldly you serve? That's the shift from fear to faith, from saving to building, from managing pennies to multiplying impact. Frugality has its season. It is not wrong. But it is not the end goal. It is the first chapter in a much larger story, the story of your wealth, the story of your contribution, the story of your expansion. So as you leave this video, don't just ask, how can I cut costs? Ask this instead, what can I create that others would value? What problem can I solve better than most? What part of me have I kept small out of fear, and what would happen if I let it grow? Because that's where your wealth is waiting. Not in your wallet, but in your courage, your contribution, your willingness to become someone bigger than your fears. And once you do that, once you become a person who builds value, you won't just have money, you'll have freedom, you'll have confidence, you'll have wealth that no recession, no mistake, and no setback can take away. because it lives inside you now, and no one can frugal their way to that.